and everything, just about how to get into the game industry and how to make the jump. So people coming from all kinds of different careers, some in software, some completely unrelated stuff, who've never done any programming at all or anything related to game development, all wanting to get in. So, like I said, I wanted to just go over some of the questions that you guys have about that and some of the ones that I've seen pop up a lot and try to help people kind of make the jump because I think it's a really good time if you're stuck at home and you're looking for something new to learn and something to jump into that you think might be an interesting and really great long-term career path. Game development's a perfect option for that. It pays really well. It's easy to do from just about anywhere. Most game developers I know are actually just working from home right now while most places are shut down. The game developers I know are generally doing relatively good. In fact, imagine a lot of people are actually playing games right now, so they're getting even more demand. So it's definitely something you should look into getting into if you're just kind of waffling and thinking about it. But anyway, let's jump into questions. Let's see what people have and what people are curious about. So there was a question in chat, and before I answer the chat questions, I did want to say there's a form linked in the description to just go submit questions to. Feel free to put them in there or in chat. If chat gets really fast, I may start missing them, so I'll dive into that form and just kind of go back and forth. So if you got something important and you want to make sure I don't miss it, go put it in there. But the first question was just about whether or not I had ever solo developed a game. And the answer to that is yes, but they've been generally relatively small games. So I built a couple games solo, but most of them were in like the I'd say under 3 month category, things that I didn't work on like a very long time. I find it really hard to work on a long term project myself, just without other people there. And one of the ones, the most successful one, was just a little VR baseball game that I built myself in a week and was a nice big hit and did great stuff. So let's see, what do we have for questions about game development and getting in? Okay, how could I get? Could you tell how to get in as a system designer? So this is it's actually a good question. It's not one that I get usually. Most of the time, the questions I get are about how to get in as a programmer or an artist or something. So it's interesting to see a good design related question. So you want to be a systems designer. Just to clarify for everybody that's watching and not sure what a systems designer is, though, systems designer is the person who's coming up with the new, and I don't want to say the word gameplay systems, but that's essentially what they are. They're coming up with the gameplay systems or the things, the ways that the game actually works, the mechanics and ways that the game functions and pieces tie together, like the way that jump mechanics work or combat mechanics work or some abilities work or the way a crafting system might work. That would be system design type stuff. Then the other type of designer that you'll hear a lot about is a content designer, and the general distinction there is that a content designer is doing things like putting in NPCs, creating quests, creating items and weapons and spells, naming things and placing things. They're more of like the storyteller. So the systems designers are more of like the kind of the game flow designer and the trying to figure out where the fun is, and the game content designers are more like the storytellers who are teaching you or sharing the story of the game and bringing that part together. And they generally work together. And there's also a lot of overlap. Like people separate these into two separate roles a lot, but there's generally a large amount of overlap. Sometimes there's complete overlap and the same people are doing the same or doing both of those things, and sometimes they're just kind of bouncing back and forth just depending on demand. So how would you get in as a systems designer? That was the job after I blabbed on about what a systems designer was forever. So there are a couple different things that you could do to dive into that. The first is create some game systems of your own. If you can, the best thing that you can do is actually have created some interesting little mini game mechanic or a mod for an existing game. So if you've created some sort of a mod in back in the day, it used to be things like Warcraft, but just about anything. Creating a mod that shows some sort of systems design there can go a long way. Being decent at writing docs that look really great. So I said decent. Being really good at writing pretty fancy docs that really get your point and your idea across can be really helpful as well, because you're going to need to show these things to people as you're interviewing. So if you go in and apply for a senior or not a senior, a systems engineer or systems designer job, they're going to be interviewing you on actually designing systems. They're going to have you do questions, or I guess more like exercises or practices to design systems. They'll give you some scenarios for the game and say, hey, well, you have these things. What can you make out of it? Like, what kind of game can you make out of this thing? Or what kind of fun gameplay can you make out of these things in this game scenario? So you need to start kind of, I guess, practicing that and start practicing impromptu game design that's not just in your specific genre, but just kind of all game design stuff. Try to get a wide variety of game design ideas. Get things like, oh, it's funny, I've actually got these on my desk. These little art of game design deck of lenses cards, great thing for that. Or just getting the book itself. And then if you're having a hard time actually getting hired, because this is, to be honest, one of the hardest jobs to get hired for, try maybe going in through another department. A lot of the time, game designers go in through the customer service or the QA departments of companies. And that's just largely about building up those relationships and friendships in the company and getting somebody who can refer you. Because the easiest way to get a job, and I don't know, I'm sure there are some industries where this doesn't apply, but everything software related that I've ever seen, and just about every other job, the easiest way to get one is to know somebody that works there who can refer you or just straight out hire you. So if you get in there in a CS or QA type position, because you're not able to get in as a designer yet, it's much easier to go straight up to a designer. I've seen dozens of designers who started off as QA people or customer service support staff or GMs in games, or just finding bugs, and they've moved up to be creative directors at big companies, and they do all kinds of crazy stuff. It's a nice path, and it's a good way in, because there's so much demand for, or I shouldn't say so much demand, there's a lot of supply of people that want to be game designers. So you got to really set yourself aside a little bit, and getting into the company and just building up friendships helps a lot with that. All right, let's just jump on to the next question. I feel like I could talk about that forever. Let's see, what else did we have? How would I learn 3D and 2D game development art? That's not one that I really could give good advice on, and it's just the art learning stuff. I'm a terrible artist myself, so I don't know how to give really good art advice. There are a couple guys on YouTube who do some really good art, and I might want to check out their stuff and see what they would recommend for learning it, but I don't really know what I would recommend. I would probably pick one or the other, though, and start with that and focus on it. Either pick 3D or 2D stuff and get that down and then work on the other. And sometimes I know people like to jump back and forth, but I really am a big fan of focusing and just picking one thing, getting good at that, and then moving on to the next thing and picking that up. So I'd stick with either 2D or 3D, and maybe jump back and forth. I'm not saying like stick with one and lock yourself in, but try to focus on getting really good at one, because most of the time in games we have separate developers or separate artists for our 2D and 3D stuff. It's very rare that there's an artist doing both, and that's primarily, it's not because the artists can't, it's just that artists tend to specialize, and there's so much demand to get art done that there's no need for them to bounce back and forth. If we have a 3D artist, we always have 3D art that we need done. If we have 2D UI stuff, we probably always have 2D and UI stuff that we need done. So just try to pick one and get really good at it and specialize on something in there. Okay, and how do you know when you're ready for your first job? I would say that you don't, and that you're going to be wrong and think that you're not ready. Most people, I'd say, underestimate their capabilities and don't realize that they're qualified enough for a job or that they're able to get a job done. I don't know if I can remember the number of times where I've gone into a job that I thought was going to be extremely difficult, and I got in there and it was dramatically easier than I expected. So I would say don't. I know it can be tough, right? Because without a lot of perspective and some idea of what everybody's doing, it's hard to know whether or not you're able to get the job done. But I would say don't sell yourself short and just go for it and try. Like, the worst case scenario is you get a job, everything goes to crap, and you get fired, and then you go get a new job. That's the worst case. Like nothing terrible is gonna happen. I mean, don't sell your house and do something crazy and leave yourself in a financial mess. But in general, I would say just go out and apply and start trying to get the job. And you'll know that you're not ready if you're just not able to get them at all. But that also could be that just a more of a portfolio and a presentation issue too. A lot of the time people think that they're not ready or that they're just not good enough, but they're really just doing a terrible job of selling themselves, and they're not presenting their capabilities and what they're able to do very well. And it can make it really tough to get a job. So I would say making sure that you have a very good portfolio is really important. But I want to go over questions and not just start rambling about other things that I think is important. How common is crunching with a job like game programming? That is a really good question. It varies dramatically from company to company. Most companies I've been at, it's not bad at all or almost non-existent. Most crunching that I've seen done has been voluntary. I can think of 2 times that were very short times where there was some mandatory crunching going on for some subset of people who had things that just had to be done by a deadline that was locked in. It was never to the point where people were complaining and unhappy or upset about it, though. So I may have just been lucky. I can be honest there. Like, it's possible that I was just lucky and everybody else's scenario is terrible and they have these terrible crunches. But most developers that I talk to don't have really bad crunch time in game development. I think part of that, too, is just that with other than games that have a publicly released, or announced release date where it's this big hyped up media thing, it's very rare that games are just locked into a date, right? We can be somewhat flexible with them. So crunching, I'd say it doesn't happen nearly as much as people think it does. In fact, I want to talk about this a little bit more because I sent out a survey and I'm going to pull it up. So I remember I sent out a survey thinking about this and realized that I was somewhat wrong. So let's see how wrong I am about crunching real quick. Then I want to talk about I want to dive into some job openings too, and just kind of go over those and show that and see what's out there and what's available right now, because I thought it was interesting when I was looking at that too. But first, let me see and find my crunching survey real quick and just show the results. Here, let's switch to a desktop mode and just take a quick peek at this. So you see that we've got most places had crunching on very rare occasions for emergency fixes, and 12% said never. But in general, and this is what I would say I've seen, the majority of places seemed to have crunching when there was an emergency, right? Like something blew up, okay, everybody's coming in, and it's not even really, I wouldn't call it crunch time. It's really just like this little chunk of time where everybody's going to work a little bit harder and a little bit longer because there's something big going on. And when people talk about crunch time, usually it's like this: we're going to work for 3 months of 12 hours, days, 6 days a week. Completely insane, completely counterproductive, and not a good idea. Most places aren't doing that. Most of the time, instead, what you're going to see is that on a rare occasion, you might have to work a little bit extra. But in general, you see that most people were working, 30 to 40 or 41 to 50 hours. So everybody is kind of in that normal, like 30 to 50 range, which I say normal, but I'd say that's normal for a programmer or developer, and especially for one that works from home and just has lots of flexibility. All right, so let me jump back over to questions real quick and then get into jobs. Anything else? Somebody mentioned my quarantine beard. I actually shaved it down. It was getting a little bit too crazy, and it looked kind of like Mad Max land here. So I had to cut this thing down a bit. And how do I get in as an intern at some AAA companies? That's kind of hard. There really aren't too many internships available. There usually are a couple at places, and a lot of the time they end up partnering with specific schools. So they'll end up like a school will contact them and they'll reach out and they'll make some partnership and they'll send them interns or they'll get recommended. I have a friend who went in as an intern at Blizzard though, and it went great for him. So I would say that if you can get in as an intern, definitely do, especially at a big, well-known AAA company on a good project. It can do great things for your career and really push you forward, and you'll learn a lot too. But I don't know that it's very easy to get into. There just don't tend to be very many of them, and they tend to be relatively short. I would also say though, if you do go in as an intern, work your ass off. Like don't just kind of half-ass it because you're not getting paid very much, or I assume you're getting paid. In most places, they force them to pay, but work really, really hard at it because it can and often does just turn into a full-time position. If you go in on an internship and you just kind of do the bare minimum, that'll be an interesting experience and you'll learn something, but you're not going to get the full value out of it. Just really pushing hard when you get in there. Also, just when you go in as a junior designer, developer, artist, or whatever, just really, really pushing hard makes a big difference, I think, just for pushing your career forward and opening up a lot of opportunities for you. Let's see. Anything else in here? What is crunch time? It's just when people work insane amounts of hours for long periods of times to get games done or projects done because the management was way off and underestimated, or other problems cause things to get way behind and you're nowhere near the date. I don't see anything else in here. Oh, one more. I have developed an XR medical simulation in the Middle East. Is it worth it to follow XR game development? I mean, can I start a good company and team in such a competitive market? I don't know. So, VR and AR have definitely picked up and they're growing. And eventually, I think AR will probably get down to sunglasses size, where you just wear normal glasses or whatever, and it projects all kinds of crazy stuff into your brain and or your eyes, whatever, and you can see stuff, and it might become kind of prolific and everywhere. VR, I'm not completely sure, until that maybe starts beaming those lasers in, and then becomes simple enough like that. So I guess the whole point of that though is that the market is still relatively small. So there's not a ton of money to make from individual players. Like there are some games out there that make a large amount of money, but there's definitely a lot more. If you're looking at just profit, it's going to be a lot bigger, I think, in the medical simulation scenario, or just in any non-game XR related stuff. It tends to just there tends to be a lot more money there available, and those projects tend to be really easy. So if you were going to start a studio for it, I wouldn't recommend against it. I've done it myself, and I really like VR stuff, so it's a lot of fun. But if you really need to focus on profit, the medical type stuff may be a little bit better way to go, just to make the good money. And is it a good idea to use placeholders for prototypes? All the time, definitely do. Would it be easier if I had a game programming master's rather than a CS one to get into studios like in Santa Monica? No. In fact, I would say that most places and most people that I know that are hiring game developers don't really care too much about the degrees that you have. And I think that this is largely because because a lot of programs, there's so much variety in programs. Most of them are not, I'd say, teaching you how to make games. They're teaching you some older things, and obviously it's going to change year over year. But I think in the past, at least, the programming classes and the game-related programming stuff that I would see out there wasn't very strong, and it didn't really dive into actual game programming. It would like really lightly and loosely touch on game programming. There'd be like one quarter where they did a little bit of game stuff, and then the rest of it was all just like theory and programming fundamentals, which you can kind of get anywhere, and you can learn it a lot faster than in a 4 or 6 year program. So, but now I know that that's changed a bit, and there are some actual programs out there that really focus on game development and teach you the entire pipeline, how to build engines, how everything works. So it's changing a little bit, but I would say that it's probably not going to make any difference at all which degree you have, if it's a CS in programming or game development. What's going to matter a lot more is what you're able to actually build, what you're able to code, and what you're able to put into a portfolio. And how you're able to answer questions when it comes to interview time. So you want to be able to have things that you can show off. So if you go through a program or a course and you end up with nothing to show off, I would say that's a big problem. You should definitely have at least a couple portfolio pieces of your own that are maybe somewhat unique, perhaps based on some theme or something, but somewhat unique and your own that you can show off by the time you've finished, I'd say, a 4-year program, definitely by the end of a 6-year program, and really before you even start applying. But you don't necessarily need to go into college to do that, right? You can learn a lot of this stuff all on your own. In fact, to be honest, like I learned 0% of the stuff that I do in school. None of it. All of my schooling is in electronics, and I remember a tiny little bit of it. You know, I did a little bit of stuff. I don't even want to dive into how little I did with the electronics I learned. All of the programming that I've learned has all been, I'd say, self-driven, not self-taught, because obviously learning from books and videos and other developers, but it's all been self-driven and not like and not formal education on it at all. And I know that for, I'd say, more than half of the game programmers that I know are in that same scenario where they learned on their own, and they fell in love with game programming. They had a blast doing it. They just kept wanting to learn more and get better at it and put new things together, and they just did. Okay, I want to jump over to those questions that were on the form real quick, and then I'll jump back into chat because there were a lot of chat questions popping up, and I've ignored the form that I sent out and asked everybody to submit questions to. Also, while I'm doing that, if you guys don't mind hitting the like and share and subscribe and all that stuff, that'd be awesome. And let's see. All right, I'm pulling up the first question now, but I got to take a drink. All right, let's see if I can switch over to desktop view too. Maybe you guys can see the questions. All right, where are we at here? Streamlabs, there we go. Get you over there, and then we switch to that, and you might be able to maybe see it. Okay. All right. I'm going to say all right like 7 more times, and then I'll finally figure out how to get this onto the screen. All right, so the first question was, hi, I'm 30 years deep into my career in entertainment and looking to become a game dev. Any specific tips for people already knee deep in something else, wanting to add another layer of complexity to their life? So I would say the biggest thing is just making sure that if you're going to get into game development, that you're really enjoying it and that you're seeing some little bit of forward progress every day. Even if you can only spend like half an hour or 20 minutes on your game development stuff every day, just putting in that little bit of time and seeing a tiny little bit of progress every day, I think it goes a long way to teaching these things and making them stick. So just, I'd say, keep it consistent and just constantly try to learn at least a tiny bit every day and try to get a little bit of progress on a game. Also, shoot really, really low at the beginning and then slowly raise it. Don't shoot for something crazy right out the gate, or else realistically what will happen is it'll be way too much. It'll be overwhelming. You won't be able to get there, and you'll very likely get discouraged. I say shoot for something small, get that done, and then the next thing is going to be faster, and you'll actually build the big thing that you want to build in the end much, much faster that way than if you just try to kick off with that as the first thing. All right, let's go on to the next one. Number one problem I see on indie games is bad input, like characters moving while on the menus or being able to do things when you're not supposed to, or having certain inputs stop working when they should be working. What would be good advice for that? I'd say, well, in a case like this, it's less of a bad input, and it's probably more of a tight coupling of the player or the character and their input and the actual movement of that character. What you really want to do when you're building games, if you want to do things like have menus and pause and be able to change the state of the game while you're running, well, first you want to have some sort of actual game state or system that's keeping track of the game state. But you also really want to separate out your input and your output, or your input and the view that you're seeing there, so that you can easily control what these buttons are doing or keys or inputs are doing based on the scenario. So that, if I hit left on my Xbox controller or my PlayStation controller, and I'm in the menu, it actually selects the thing to the left instead of moving my character. And you need to have both awareness of the context and that state of the game, but also that separation so that these messages, you don't have just a player that's constantly checking to see if you push to left. Because that's kind of like the default naive solution. When it's naive, it's like the simplest solution and the one that would work for most scenarios, right? You have a character and you push left, it moves left. You push right, it moves right, and you're good, right? But when you get into these bigger scenarios where you have these longer running games with different systems, different menus, and I guess just different states, you really have to split that out. And that's what I would recommend here is just splitting those things out and then being able to tie them together, bind them together, and then switch them based on the state of the game. It's a fun thing to do. It's an interesting problem for sure, but I don't know that I could dive into too much example here. It's quite a bit of work to actually put it together right. But it's a very good observation, though. It is something that happens. How good do you have to be to actually get a job in studios like Santa Monica? To be honest, I would say that for almost any job, it's less about how good you are and more about how good you can sell yourself. To be completely honest, like you need to be good enough to do the job and to do the basics. Beyond that, it tends to be a lot of I guess a lot of selling yourself and connections, knowing people, meeting people, and having other people know what you can do and have some confidence in your capabilities goes a long way. I don't know how else to answer this question though on exactly how good you have to be. I'd say you got to be good to get into any big AAA studio, but the better you are at selling what you're good at and showing that off, the easier it will be for sure. You can be amazing at stuff and terrible at showing off your skills. You'll never get hired. All right, I made a simple bingo app. How do I know if I'm good enough to get a job and what type should I get? Well, if you made a simple bingo app, you're definitely good enough to get at least some jobs. Doesn't mean necessarily going to get in at a AAA studio right away, but there are plenty of companies and yeah, really just companies that need apps similar to that are, I'd say, of that complexity or even a little bit less or slightly more. So I would say you definitely could, if you can build a simple bingo app and it works and you can get the whole workflow from start to finish, everything works, you got your menus hooked up and it's bug free and functional, I would say that you can definitely get some sort of a job doing game development or app development in Unity. um, yeah, there's no reason not to. If you're at that point, there's no reason not to at least try. You should be able to find something. Can you recommend any sites for recruiting work for hire for programmers or artists? I wanted to recommend one site right now, actually. So let me do that. And that was this Cybercoder site. It's one I've used before. Let's pull it up. Pull up Cybercoder. So I was doing a little bit of a search real quick earlier this morning, trying to get an idea of what the job market was looking like right now with game stuff. Not for myself, but just because a lot of people have been asking me about this stuff. And I realized that Cybercoders actually still had quite a few jobs, while most sites didn't seem to. So if we look on here, just did a search for Unity on this Cybercoder site, it shows 60 jobs, and a lot of them were surprisingly remote too. You can see they've got remote positions from Denver and Texas and Seattle. They're like all over the place. Oh wait, these are all the same. That's confusing. Uh-oh. Now I'm kind of curious what this is. Like, why are they? Oh, it's probably the same job in a bunch of places. Damn, I got excited. I thought this was a bunch of remote jobs. It looks like it's one job posted in every place for this remote one. Okay, so there's one remote one, and then there are a bunch of other positions on here. So anyway, let's go over some other sites though that I'd use. So I've used this Cybercoder site quite a bit for Unity jobs. It seems to have a lot of programming and .NET jobs on it. And somebody's saying that they've applied for a lot of Cybercoder stuff and didn't have anything great. Every time I've applied for one of these in the past, or not every time, but many of the times I've applied, I got relatively good responses back from the recruiters and stuff. So it seemed like a decent site to work with, and I've actually taken a job through them before. So I would say I'd recommend them, but who knows what the experience is like for everybody else and if it's changed since the last time I used them. The other site that I used to love using was the Gamma Sutra job site, but when I looked on here, it seems completely dead. I was kind of surprised. So I searched for Unity or just programming in general. There are very few positions available. So Cybercoders was good. The other one that I wanted to check out, and actually, why don't we just check it out right now while we're on the stream, was the Unity Connect one. Because I know that they had a job section on here, and I have not looked at it in a very long time. So I'm kind of curious to see what kind of jobs they've got available. So let's just take a quick peek. So go to jobs, search jobs, and how many are on here? 472. How many are full-time and remote okay? Because, 45. Tester, Photon. This was the problem that I had with this site, was a lot of these didn't seem like they were actual jobs. Like a lot of these posts don't, but a lot of them I think are. It's just kind of a little bit of noise in here to dig through and find the actual jobs, like, and not these things like where it just says tester and a bunch of test stuff. It's like they're not getting visually vetted by a human or something. But that could also just be the time right now, right? Well, let's see. Experienced Unity developer for 3D mobile game. Interesting. So it looks like there's quite a few jobs at least on here. I want to jump back to questions and then maybe actually dive into some of these jobs and take a look at some of the descriptions and the requirements, because I want to talk about that a little bit, but I also want to make sure that I don't skip people's questions because I don't have too much time. So for sites, I'd say Cybercoders and the Gamma Sutra jobs one. Unity Connect was a good one, although it's, like I said, a little bit confusing. There's a lot of stuff on there, but those are good ones. Indeed was total garbage. I actually looked on there and I saw, when I searched for Unity, a job posting that I know closed 3 years ago on the front page, like one of the first results. It was a job that I literally posted and closed like 3 or more years ago. So I would say I'd avoid Indeed for that. But the other three seem really good. And if anybody else has recommendations, please drop it in chat or in a comment. I'd be kind of curious. Look for other sites that might have good job postings for game developers that we can just kind of dig into. Okay, let's look at this next question here, which was, I'm already comfortable with amateur game dev, but I'm struggling to choose a project I should focus on for a first commercial game. Do you have any advice? Thank you. That is tough. Because the question isn't even on screen. Why my screen is messed up there? Let's see if I can fix that. Oh, I see it. Let's do a scale to fit. Where do we do that? We're going to fix this so you can see a little bit more. But the question was about how to pick a project to focus on. So say he's got some amateur experience but wants to pick like a long-term big project to work on. And it says as a first commercial game, so I assume that's like you want to release your first big indie project. I would say the biggest advice I can give here is build something that you're going to love, because if you build anything else, it's probably going to flop unless it's totally analytics driven or it's just a complete passion project that you're going to love. You're going to have a really, really hard time. Those are your two biggest ways to have, I think, a big hit. Either tons of data and you know exactly what to look for and how to hit that data and you got the money to do it, or it's a project that you love. It's like the passion thing that you really want to build and you're going to put your heart into it and make it awesome. I would go with that option when you're trying to figure out what to do for a first commercial game. Don't try to pick based on like what you think is going to be a big hit or what's popular now. By the time you finish, what's popular now won't be what's popular anymore. That will have moved on, and your thing will be just another version of that. So build the thing that you really want, that you really are excited about. All right, I'm getting ready for a technical interview for a network programmer position. Any tips? I did a stream with my buddy Kyle on networking stuff for game development. I would say go listen to that. It was like 2 or 3 hours of us just talking about networking tips, ways to make networking better, what other people do, and ways to just do networking the best you can for a AAA game. So I'd say go just listen to that. If you have to 2x it, whatever. It's long, but it's definitely full of good stuff. And then I'd say go look for networking programming interview questions. It's been a while since I had to do any, but there are some pretty common standard questions. I don't want to dive into them and confuse everybody right here, but I'd say go do a quick search and do that. But also just go watch that video because Kyle had all kinds of really great insight onto what people are using now, what works really well, and the core things that you need to do to make the networking as fast as possible and as good as possible. And one really important thing is that your networking layer should have little to no impact on your game. If your networking layer is a bottleneck, if it's causing garbage allocations in Unity, or it's causing slowdowns or performance problems or memory fragmentation in a non C sharp and something other than Unity, you need to address those, and you need to really have a solid, stable networking layer that's as fast as possible and doesn't cause problems. Because if you build on top of a networking layer that's got problems, you're going to have nonstop problems. We actually had this problem in Vanguard. Right? Vanguard had some networking issues that were at kind of a low level that were worked on, and then got mostly fixed, but then never got completely done, or at least didn't get completely cleaned up and finished until long after the game had kind of gone through its life cycle and almost died. So say get it right, and you need high performance. I don't know for other tips for the interview though. Just go watch the video. Hey Jason, I'm a novice began learning C# 6 months ago and Unity 4 months ago. What's the best way to get more experience? What goals should I have for 1 year? Thank you. Well, I would say the best way to get more experience is to just keep building games. So just pick games and work on them every day and build them relatively nonstop. I would say if you're just getting started and you're at that point, don't build one game, but build multiple games. Maybe start a new game every 3 to 6 weeks, kind of kick off a new one and scope them at the point where you think you can finish them in half that time, because it's going to take you at least twice as long to finish it as you think. So pick something, scope it down really small and build it, and then do it again and start over. The reason for that is that the iteration and the restarting tends to, I think, lock some of the stuff into people's brains. So you start to learn these patterns and get used to them just somewhat from the repetition, but also just from remembering how you did it before and going back and looking at your previous thing. So what you'll find is that, by game 3, game 2, you're looking back at your previous code to see how you did things. Game 3, you're looking back a little bit. You get on to like your 5th or 6th game, and you realize that you don't have to look back at the previous ones nearly as much because you're starting to remember how you did these things, and you're also finding problems with the way that you did things in the first one. And then eventually you're finding problems with the way that you did things in the second one. You're realizing like, okay, I made some mistakes here, and I'm getting better. And you'll see you'll get relatively fast and I think constant improvement. It's like that intentional practice where if you stick with one project the whole time, what you can tend to find is that if you find a bad practice or a bad pattern or just a bad habit, you'll lock yourself into that bad habit. And instead of finding new ways because you're getting this fresh start every time, you just keep repeating the bad habits, and the bad things will grow. You'll start to get stuck more because the problems are going to stay the same. The hard problems that you keep pushing off will stay there and keep being the hard problems, and you're not going to have easy problems to keep solving constantly like you will when you're restarting and creating new projects. When I say creating new projects, I don't mean like, go build tic-tac-toe and then delete it and build tic-tac-toe and delete it and build tic-tac-toe. Like, go build new different types of games that are slightly different with some variety. Build a puzzle game, build a platformer, build a little shooting game, build a whatever it is you can come up with. Try building a bunch of different little things, but just don't scope them so big that they're not easy to finish. You want to be able to finish them. I mean, ideally, what I like to say is like 2 to 3 weeks, right? Like try to scope them for 2 to 3 weeks at and then if you can't finish them in that, maybe up to 6, but try to go as fast as possible and just get them done and knock them out. And then if you get stuck on it or one's terrible and you hate it, throw it away and move on to the next one, right? You're like, hey, I don't really like working on this project, or this is boring, or this one's not fun. Just toss it and move on to the next one. Don't sit there and don't do the unfun stuff. Make it fun when you're starting to learn. You should always, I think, really enjoy learning game development in the beginning, and probably most of the time along the way. It's only when you hit really hard problems and you get strong deadlines when it should not be fun. Other than that, it should be fun most of the time. Pretty much all the time. All right, so is calling transform.local position always more optimal than transform position? I believe it is, but it's also almost never as useful. I rarely care about the local position. I almost always just care about the world position. And it's also not performant enough, or enough of a performance difference to matter in 99.9% of cases. So I'd say don't worry about it unless it happens to be a thing that shows up on the profiler for you and there's some reason that you need to optimize it. You're not gonna, I would say is you're not gonna run into a scenario probably where using local position instead of position is gonna have any impact at all on the performance of your game. It's extremely rare that would have any impact at all. You'd have to be in a really weird edge case, I think. What advice could you give someone who doesn't feel like they're making any progress and is questioning whether they are good enough to become a developer? Well, I'd say some of the advice that I gave just a minute ago on creating a lot of projects, and it's hard to know without a little bit of context on how long you've been doing it and what kinds of things you've already been doing. But I would say switching projects can go a long way. Also, getting onto teams where you're working with other developers who are more experienced. It's a huge, huge benefit, and you're going to learn a lot that way. Sometimes it can be really tempting to be like the most knowledgeable programmer on the team, or like that you want to be the smartest person in the room. But it comes at a real cost, because when you're the smartest one there, you're really responsible for teaching everybody else. Like that becomes your job, is teaching everyone else. You really want to be in a room where you're kind of in the middle, where there are a lot of people that are smarter than you about other things, different things that you don't know about, that you can absorb and learn from. So if you can get into positions where you're actually working alongside other developers, pairing ideally, or mob programming would be great. That can help a ton. So I would recommend that. See if you can get into that scenario. And again, hard to know without knowing your exact setup and what's going on there. But I would recommend working with other people and working on a lot of different types of projects, especially if you're somewhat new, within the first 2 years. What is your advice about resume and showing your code as a junior developer? That's a great question. I think the resume is pretty important, but not as important as a portfolio. The resume should have a link to your webpage that has at least some info and something that you've put together, if you've built anything at all, or just something that really shows off what you can do is what you want to shoot for. But other than that, some other things that are important on there are, if you've worked at any other positions, although it says as a junior dev, so assuming you don't, so let's say you've got a little bit of experience. You've got one job on there. I want to point out the important stuff to show there is what you've actually done for that job to solve problems. So if you worked you had one game dev job, maybe it was even in QA, or it was in CS, or what, it wasn't actual development, but you're doing something related. Whatever it was, talk about the problems that you solved for the company and how you were able to improve the workflow, improve the process, or make it easier, for the team to just get things done faster or better, or with less issues. And focus on those types of things when you're spelling out what your job was. Don't put obvious tested games. Yeah, if you were in QA, yeah, no crap, you tested games. But put the actual achievements and the things that you did that I think bring value to the company or bring value to the team. That's what you want to focus on there. Also, if you're going to put in any hobbies or skills, have them be relevant. I would say relevant to game development, or also just a little trick here. If they happen to overlap with somebody who's a hiring manager for this place or a hiring person, you can put those in too because they tend to bring up discussions, and then you can I'd say ease the discussion and ease the interview a little bit just by bonding over a little common shared ground. So other than that though, customize your resume for each position. So whenever you submit your resume to a position, don't just keep submitting the same thing. Don't batch submit it or mass submit it. Customize it for every single position and highlight and focus on the things that they care about. So if they have specific features or specific skill sets that they want to see that you have, move those to the top. It's when I say customize, it's mostly about reordering, rearranging things, maybe cutting things that don't really apply or that might distract from what you can bring to the job. Like say the job is all Unity stuff and it's all C# and that's all they care about, right? Then maybe you don't need to put on your JavaScript or your Python experience or your C++. But if it's something that's doing both of these things, maybe it's like they also do JavaScript stuff and they do C++, and you've got both of those, then put those both up there. Just make sure that your skills actually, the ones that you have, that you highlight those right at the top or at the top of the section where it makes sense. Also, nobody cares about your high school education. There's no point in putting that on there. And yeah, I'd say if your education isn't relevant, it's not really worth putting onto there for game development stuff. People really care about whether or not you understand games, know the industry, and can actually build stuff. That's what matters. Okay. And for showing code, I would say, if you're a junior developer and you want to show code, show it to other developers that you know that are much better than you, and then ask them for feedback, iterate on it, and if they say it's good enough, then share it. If they say I would change it like this, this, and this, then make those changes and then share it once you understand what those changes are. Because I've seen some junior developers whose code would cause problems and make it harder for them to get hired. And I've seen some who I think if they just showed their code, they'd get hired instantly, at above a junior level, with no professional experience. All right, let's see. What should I learn first code-wise? Methods or variables? I think you kind of have to learn them both around the same time. Like methods and variables are the two key methods, variables, and classes are like the three key parts of object-oriented programming. And once you understand the three of those and how you can kind of mix and match them to make magic, that's really, I think, the core of it. So I would say don't worry about like learning too much detail about methods, variables, or classes, but understand how they work, how you can use them, and how they kind of tie together to make things happen. You should be able to figure or learn all of those in, I'd say, a day or so, and just kind of get used to methods and variables, but you're not going to get comfortable with them, right? So you're going to learn these things. You're going to understand them when you first try it out and maybe understand what's happening when you're writing it a little bit, and then you're going to forget it because it's like learning a new language, right? You're learning a brand new language that doesn't speak like English. It's totally different, or doesn't speak like whatever languages you're used to. It's weird. It's got odd symbols and weird, strange forms. And then we do all kinds of weird little tricks to make things even more complicated. So I wouldn't expect to just memorize it all. Just keep doing it. And as you get more and more practice in there, you're going to start to understand it a bit more. Can I move my webcam? Yeah, I probably could do that. Let me see. No. Okay, if I do that, I'm going to end up messing this whole thing up, huh? There we go. Look at that. I moved me. I'm like a wizard. All right, let's go on to the next one. Why is optimization important, and what are the basic steps to follow? Well, the reason it's important is if your game is unoptimized, my 11-year-old son will call it an unoptimized piece of garbage and rant about it and complain. Well, and so will everybody else's. That's what he does. It cracks me up. He always, it's unoptimized. It's unoptimized trash every time he gets under like 60 frames a second. It's a little weird, whatever. But realistically, the goal of optimization is to make sure that your game runs fast enough in every scenario, right? You want to make sure that your game never goes below the minimum threshold of frame rate to feel and play well. So if it drops down too slow and starts hitching or stuttering, players will notice and players will complain. If it loads too slow or does other things, hitches because of garbage collection, players will know. So the biggest thing, or like when you say what steps to follow for optimization, just run the profiler. It's the fastest and easiest way to both find the problems in your existing game and to fix them, and to just learn what problems are, because you'll see the problems after you've written them, and then you'll understand, hey, this actually caused this slowdown in the profiler, and it caused whatever 10 milliseconds here every frame and totally killed my frame rate. And as you make these mistakes and you see them in the profiler and you see the cost of some of the actions that you might be doing, you'll start to learn what not to do, and you'll pick up tips kind of along the way. That's what I would do. Just jump into the profiler and start playing with it first. How much of an importance would you put for a game developer to know C++? I use Unity mainly, but for major big companies, it seems like you would need to know or be really good with C++. It's really, if you want to work at a company that's using Unreal, you're going to want to know C++. And if you're working at a company that's using Unity, you're going to want to know C#. And C++ doesn't hurt to know. It can be helpful to know. There are some benefits. It's not going to make a huge impact in your day-to-day Unity life, though. Most of the Unity developers I know a little bit of C++. A lot of them used to work in C++ back in the day. But a lot of them have never touched C++ too. And the ones that I know that do know some C++, they don't use it regularly. Not enough that they would say that they feel comfortable or fluent in it anymore. So I would say that it's not super important. It is helpful. There's a benefit there, but it's not something that I would recommend people go focus on if they're trying to get better at learning game development and Unity in general. Like I said, if they want to get into Unreal development, without a doubt, or if they're just kind of curious about how things work underlying and what the memory model looks like for C++ and what the differences are, it would be interesting to learn, and it's good to know, but not vital. What's the state of the art on QA automation in video games industry? That is a great question. So unit testing, first off, is a big one. And this is not really, it says QA automation. Sorry, I just read a question that asked if I had a boyfriend. The answer is no. I have a lovely wife who just walked by outside. But so I got a little distracted by that one. So the state of the art on QA automation. I don't know that I could give you the best answer for that, because there are a lot of tools out there for managing or for automating testing of games. I haven't used most of them that are out there nowadays, but what I do use a lot of is just unit testing and integration tests, which are available in Unity, and you can do them in pretty much any game engine, I think, now. So we write these tests that validate the code, and then that is kind of the first line defense. So the goal really with unit testing is to make sure that we're not giving bugs to a QA team or to a QA tool that has to then find them. So it's kind of like that first guard. After that, I don't know what the next ones are. There are actually a couple tools that I was looking at evaluating and grab some trials for, but I haven't had a chance to actually try them out enough to know which one's good and which ones are not. Sorry, watching in chat too. Does a senior or lead developer earn $200K, or is it a dream? And I just want to answer that one. Yeah, there definitely. I know a lot of senior devs that earn 200 or more, and a lot of leads that are quite a bit above that too. And in game development, outside of game development, it's the same though. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. I'm actually interested in creating a forum or YouTube channel about game development. Cat Light Coding has been a big inspiration. Any advice? Where should I start? My biggest advice is just do it. Get out there and just start. Don't worry about it being great or good or perfect. It'll probably suck at first. Everything does, and you're going to get better at it over time. And you're going to, every day that you delay, you're just slowing yourself down and hurting yourself for no reason. So just get out there, start putting things out there. Don't expect amazing results at first, and watch it as it grows. Just be consistent, constantly keep releasing things and keep iterating and getting better. Just don't delay is, I'd say, the biggest advice I got on that. Just get out there and do it. I'm applying for an indie game company, and my question is learning their scripting language. Is Unity learning their scripting language for Unity is a good idea. I'm not sure I completely understand. If they're using Unity, understanding Unity is going to be a huge, huge benefit. If you don't have experience with the engine that the company is working in, it's a big drawback. People are going to go for the person who understands the engine, understands the terminology, and can communicate about the engine and the project right away. So I'd say if they're using Unity, dive into it and understand it right away. If they have some custom scripting language, I wouldn't worry too much about learning their own custom thing until you're hired. But unless it's some big available public thing that they already make available and there's a lot of information on there. But I wouldn't worry about that. But I would definitely make sure that you understand the engine that they're working on. Hi, Jason. I've been using Unity since 2015, and I find it difficult to do everything art and coding. I'm a coder in my day job. I now find I like to upgrade old games. From the 90s, like the Spectrum and C64. Is this a good way to go? I love doing that too. In fact, I was looking at a C64 emulator very recently. C64 was like my intro to coding. It's the Commodore 64 for everybody who's not 100 like me. Anyway, when you talk about doing everything art and coding, I'll just be honest. I don't do any art. I never do art. I'm terrible at art. I buy all my art or have friends do my art or find free art. I find that I'm not an artist and I don't want to try to pretend to be one, and I don't want to waste my time and energy doing subpar artwork. So I focus 100% on the coding and let other people do the art. As for rebuilding old games, I think it's a great idea. It's a lot of fun, and it avoids you having to deal with figuring out what the fun is. Like, you kind of know what the fun is when you're rebuilding an old game like that. And there's just a large wealth of fun, exciting stuff to build. So yeah, I think it's a good way to go. I've developed little things for mobile games before, but I think the real game development is nothing like that. I'm good with code and now trying to create an architecture for a long-term project. When I do so, I feel like I'm more closer to developing something. So what is real game development for you? Okay, so I think the bigger difference here is probably the size and scale of projects that you're talking about. Not so much that it's mobile versus non-mobile stuff. Because I think you can have mobile projects that are huge and have a really well thought out architecture. I'd say that my biggest advice here is when you're trying to architect things, it should be somewhat natural and fit in with your game. You want to make sure that you're not pre-deciding on a lot of architectural decisions before you need to, that you're not making decisions, I guess, before you absolutely have to, which I think, I think it was Uncle Bob probably that said, or his recommendation on when to make decisions was at the last reasonable opportunity, I think was what he said. Something like that. But that's what I would recommend too. And I do that for everything, not just programming stuff. But make the decision at the last reasonable opportunity. Don't just try to pre-architect and try to shove your game into a specific architecture. That's all I was saying. Watch out for that. But real game development for me is building games and shipping them. So it's building out big, not even big. Building out medium-sized games, things that are bigger than like little 1-month projects that are shipped to the public that lots of people are going to play. Lots of people, at least ideally, are going to play. And sometimes that involves a lot of architecture, to be honest. Let's go on to the next one. Which market platform do you suggest? I think the mobile market is going to be super competitive. Which one's better, mobile, console, PC, or web? I really don't know, to be honest, when it comes to like where you're going to make money. Mobile was huge when it came out. VR was huge when it came out. AR was huge when it came out. Anything when it comes out becomes just a huge hit. Oh, almost anything. A couple things I can think of that came out recently that were big flops. But most things that come out are like big hits when they release, and it's good to get into new stuff right away. As for what market is going to be best, I wish I could tell you. I would just shoot for whatever kind of game is going to be the most fun. Then try to make the best game. I worry less about the platform now, but to be honest, I primarily work on PC stuff now, just because I have more fun doing it. I just don't get as excited about mobile stuff or web stuff. Any comments on how hard different genres of games are to develop? Simulation, shooters, puzzles, etc. Only that multiplayer stuff is dramatically harder. So if you're getting into game development and you want to make games and your only thing you want to make is multiplayer games, don't force yourself to start there. Start with some single player stuff first, get used to it, and then dive into multiplayer stuff. Multiplayer is dramatically harder. I wouldn't say that any of the other types are dramatically, I'd say, well, it says how hard different. Yeah. So puzzle games generally tend to be easier. Shooters and simulations, strategy games, a bit harder. That's about it, right? I think so. Yeah, and then multiplayer stuff is obviously insanely harder. And then things where you're trying to push the limits and do something kind of crazy and new, or like go way beyond what anybody else has done, those tend to be a lot harder. But that's not so much a genre. I'm thinking of things like City Skylines, right? Game went just like took city building to the next level. That kind of stuff, I'm quite a bit harder. But yeah, puzzles are easy. Go with puzzles if you want to make something simple. Puzzles and platformers tend to be easy. I would say easier to develop if you're not breaking the mold and doing something really crazy and new. Hi, on Monday I'll start my internship as a game dev. I'm really excited, but I don't know what to expect in the first few days. Do you have any advice? It's especially worrying given that I'll have to work from home. This is a tough one, because I would say normally with an internship like this, I would expect you would kind of follow somebody around all day. You would sit next to somebody who would be there guiding you and kind of showing you the ropes and teaching you how the company works and how to do the job that you have to do. Hold on real quick. But in this scenario where you're working from home, yeah, I don't know. I think it's actually probably going to be kind of hard. 1 second. I got a message. Just going to make sure there's not an emergency here. I think everything's okay. So, yeah, I think what you're going to want to do, though, is make sure that you're communicating a lot. Because if you're in an internship and it's remote and there's not somebody that's there constantly guiding you, it's going to be very easy to go unnoticed or kind of fall off or get ignored and not really be given much to do. So it depends a lot on who's in charge of onboarding you there, how that process is going to be. But if you don't find it very interactive, I would try to do your best without being annoying to make sure that people remember you're there and engage, and that you're able to do things to help them and add some value to it. The more that you can make friends and add value to what they're doing there, the better it'll be. So I'd say just try to keep pushing for that and seeing what you can do to make things better. Let's see what else we got here. Big fan of your work, and use a personal thank you. I'm a 31-year-old game dev and started a 3-year game dev academy in November in Italy. I plan to move out of the country when it's done. Do you think I might get any remote gig to start earning a little while working on other people's projects? Not necessarily gaming related, but definitely Unity, C#. Yeah, without a doubt. There are a lot of remote gigs doing, especially non-gaming related things. I'd say there's probably more non-gaming related remote jobs for Unity than gaming related remote jobs. I don't know that to be a fact. I'm just kind of wildly making it up and guessing. But from what I've seen, I think that that's probably the case. And that's because there are a lot of short-term contracts for non-game projects, things that are interactive experiences for museums or other types of places. Of course, right now, all of those are struggling, so it might be quite a bit harder. I'm not really sure when that's going to clear back up and those types of things are going to start happening again, where people are going back into places and people want installations for stuff. So I'd say you definitely can get those types of jobs, and they're out there. They might just be a little bit harder as of the last couple weeks to find. How often have you had to work with Houdini? I'm a VFX artist looking at getting into the game industry. Is that a skill game studios are looking for? Yes. For me, very, very little, but we're actually transitioning into using Houdini now, so it will be quite a bit very soon. I would say it's definitely a skill that a lot of game studios are very interested in. So if you're not sure what Houdini is, I'd say go. I don't think I could do it justice by trying to describe it. Just Google it. Search for Houdini Unity or Houdini VFX. You'll see it. You'll see some of the magic there and some of the crazy stuff that you're able to do with it. Okay, what must I know to be able to start to apply for a junior dev job? I'm a self-taught programmer, and I made a test where the only feedback I got was not enough knowledge. Okay, I would like to understand better what I need to know. That's a great question. And I think a lot of the time you apply for jobs and you get back responses like that, where it's just you don't know what they wanted you to know, but they don't tell you what it was that they wanted you to know. And it usually means that there were a couple of things that stood out to them as like key fundamental things that they thought you were missing. And don't be upset by it either. I mean, it's happened to me plenty of times too, where I've gone in earlier in my career, especially, and just been turned down because I didn't know things that I thought I knew a lot of stuff, and there was a lot that I just didn't know about. And they would ask me questions like, "I've never even heard of that," and I'm like, "Okay, well, it's great, nice talking to you. It was, good time and all, but not today." So I wouldn't get upset or discouraged by it, but I would say the best thing, really, it's tough because the best thing you can do there is start sharing your code with other people and getting actual feedback on like how you could improve it. Start getting some code reviews on ways that you could make your code better, or ways that you could maybe restructure things to make it seem maybe a little bit more experienced or professional. Perhaps introducing interfaces and events, or just optimization of some things that you may be doing. It's hard to, like I said, it's really, really hard to say without seeing the code. Perhaps we could do like some sort of a code review or just dive in and take a peek at it. You know what? Why email me if you don't mind? Can you email me later today and just let me know what it was you had and if there's maybe some sample, because I've done some code review videos in the past. Maybe we can do one and just talk about the code and talk about what types of things are missing there and what you could do to maybe improve it, or things that might be missing that might have caused this problem to help you get it. But for what you actually need to know to start as a junior game dev, let me go over my list of things that I look for. But first, let me take a drink, and then I'll go over the list of things that I look for if I'm going to hire a junior developer. All right. So first is I want to know that they've actually built something in Unity. I don't care too much what it is. I don't care if it's an app, a game, a mobile game, a VR game, an AR game, whatever it is. I want to know that they've at least built something in there, that they understand the workflow. They can put a project together, they can hit build and run, and it actually runs. They can compile it, and that they understand, like, if there's a compiler error and it's something pretty standard, they can understand what it is and know how to go fix it. It's not some weird, arcane thing that's going on. If it's just a standard error, that they can figure it out and fix it. So that's I'd say step number one. They can build something, and they have built something. Doesn't matter too much what it is. Two is that they have some semblance of an idea of what clean code looks like. Not that their code is perfect and clean, but that they have some idea of it. That they're not naming their variables A1, A2, B3, and C17 or whatever weird nonsense. That they're actually naming things in a way that somewhat makes sense and that I can understand their code. So that when I open up their code, even if it's not perfect, I can understand it and it somewhat flows. And like number three, that they don't do like insanely terrible, ridiculous stuff with spacing. If you send me a class file and it's got 20 blank lines and then a line of code and then 10 more blank lines and a line of code, I'm going to say, we're not even close, right? Like you need to understand the value of having clean, readable, understandable code. And you don't have to understand it and be able to write it great, but it has to at least be somewhat understandable, and you have to understand, I guess, kind of that value. For technical things that I look for, understanding prefabs and game objects, the difference between them, what prefabs are for, how you would use them, some scenarios you would use them in, understanding events and delegates. You don't need to have a really deep understanding of them, but at least knowing how to use an event, when you might want to use an event, knowing that design patterns exist. Maybe not knowing all of them, maybe having heard of one. Great help for it. Again, this is at the junior level. Above junior level, I expect a whole lot more, but at a junior level, say, you've heard of solid principles or the single responsibility principle. You might not know what it is, might not be able to recite them all or remember anything about them really, but you've at least heard of them and have some idea of the concepts of having clean code. And I'd say that's kind of the basics. And then understanding all of the different key areas of the editor, of course, like where the scene view, game view, inspector, and all that stuff, and being able to navigate that in a reasonable pace. That's about it. All right, let's go on. All right, I just finished my first semester at Game Dev College. They have mentors rather than lectures, and the course is structured by watching tutorials on their student portal. My mentor doesn't even have a Unity certification, but the college is Unity certified. That makes sense. The course is 1 year, but acts like it's the third year, telling us to create concept art for everything. Despite not teaching any art at all. Thankfully, self-taught in C# because they promise they'll teach coding standards, but yeah, they make everything public. Okay. At the end of the year, they give a Unity certification voucher, and I only found out today that it's the 3D artist one. I want to take programmer certification despite not teaching any art at all. Okay. I am thankfully self-taught in C# because they promised to teach coding standards. Okay, I think that one just got kind of copy-pasted. Okay, I want to take the program and can't get a refund. Oh, what should I do? I'm not completely sure here. That seems like a somewhat strange scenario. I mean, doing 3D art and programming are relatively different programs, so I'm not sure how it got mixed up or how they kind of combined those two. I think that sometimes it's easy for people to think that you're going to be like an artist and a programmer in one, but that's a really rare unicorny type thing. It's not something that people are generally good at. People aren't usually good at art and code. I know a couple, but they're very, very rare. I don't know what the best solution here is. I mean, if they're going to go into coding, then sticking around and learning that part too, and then getting that certification might be good. But I wish I had better advice, but it seems like kind of a weird, messy scenario. I don't know what to recommend there. I wouldn't worry too much about the mentors having Unity certification or anything, though. I assume that they've already gone through the program and they've got an idea of what stuff is there. So, and they mentioned, he says you forgot to mention that they plagiarized all their code from YouTube. That sounds even harder. Yeah, that seems kind of like a mess, man. I don't know what to tell you there. I really don't know a whole lot about the whole certification program though, or any of that stuff. Sorry, but I would just jump back into the programming stuff, I guess. It seems like really weird though. Get a certification for art and don't do any art, and then, yeah. Sorry, man. I wish I had some better advice for you. Should I be concerned with Unity's new entity component system? Yes. The answer is yes, but I'll give the real quick answer. You should be concerned with it. If you're getting started with Unity and you don't know what entity component system is, or you don't have a specific scenario where you think like, oh, this is going to perfectly solve that problem, I wouldn't think too much about it yet. It solves some very good, difficult problems. They're not problems that most people have. I wouldn't put your energy into there unless you need it, because it's still in flux, it's still changing, and it's going to get easier and easier to use and probably more and more integrated into the engine as things go. So unless you have a scenario for it, I wouldn't put too much energy into it. And that's kind of what I've done too, just waiting for specific use cases before I dive too deep into it, because otherwise you're just learning things that are going to change and not actually match when you need to use them. but it's good to understand them at least at a fundamental level. So I'd say I'd still spend like a day like going through the process, understanding it, getting a grasp on it, so that way you know when things are gonna, where it will apply and where it can help. So right now I'm working with Unity in the medical field. I want to do the switch to game programming. What do you suggest to do? I have a few projects for game jams under my belt. With the current situation with COVID-19, what should we expect? So making the switch is really just about applying at game studios, right? Really what you've got to do there. If you're making apps in the medical field and you've got 4 game jams done, you're probably, and assuming you finished your games there, you're probably ready to be in at the very least at a junior level, maybe even higher. But I would say it's really just about getting out there and applying and trying to find the positions. There are quite a few of them out there. There are probably less now with the current situation. But from what I've seen, I haven't seen a huge hit in the gaming industry. And I think part of it is just because everybody's at home playing games. So there's even more demand right now for what we do, and we can do it remotely. So it's been less hit than most other things. But I don't know what to really expect long term. I'd just be making stuff up and guessing if I tried to tell you. But I would say just get out there and start applying for stuff. There's no reason not to if you're at that point. All right, let's go. I'm going to try to speed through these because I got like 10 minutes left before I got to hop out of here. So I'm going to go as quick as I can and get through the rest of these questions and then answer anything else. And if you guys have more stuff, just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to answer them when I get back to my computer later and see what I can help with. So what are the chances for working from home? Where I live, there's 0 game dev positions within an hour's drive. Is something employees will consider for a new hire? Definitely. Most of the game developers, no, about half of the game developers I know now work from home. It's becoming more and more prevalent. I think with this new situation that's going on, a lot of people are going to switch to working from home, and a lot of them are going to make it permanent. I would say your chances are extremely high for working from home as a game dev. In fact, I've known game devs working from home for the last 15 years, and they all love it. It's an easy one to do from home. Maybe not for an artist. Probably still for an artist, actually. I think about it. Yeah, work from home is pretty simple for game devs. Hi, is there let's try that again. Hi, is there a method to scale perfectly UI mobile game with the different sizes of the screen? Are you going to make more tutorials about that? I think I did do one tutorial about that on scaling your mobile UI. There are just some settings that you need to set on this camera and use the canvas scaler component on there, and that will usually get most of the problems solved. Just having that canvas scaler. A lot of people don't realize they can just drop that on there and it's going to fix most of the problems. If you have a specific mobile UI issue that you want to share, though, maybe you can send that over and I'll do a video. Maybe I can do a couple little code reviews and fix a couple little issues all at once. That could be an interesting thing. Is cereal soup? Why or why not? I guess technically it probably is. Although it's cold soup. How do you feel about people putting pineapple on pizza? I allow it. I don't prefer it, but I've never executed anyone for it. And yeah, I'll continue to allow it, but I don't think that it belongs there. I do like pineapple in my Disneyland drinks, though. If I for a video game, what would be some of the cheat codes? I don't know. It'd probably be up, up, down, down. By the way, since I'm getting some silly questions, I wanted to just briefly mention yesterday and the day before I watched this Mythic Quest show. I don't know if you guys have seen it. I guess it's only on Apple TV, but whatever. My daughter had an iPhone, so I just used her account. It was pretty cool, and it was pretty surprisingly and disturbingly close to accurate on actual game development at MMO companies. So it was a blast. It's just a show about making MMOs from a company, and it's a comedy, but it was worth watching. So if you're into game development and goofy comedy stuff, I'd check it out. All right, let's go on. Hello, and thanks for your videos. I'm a 3D modeler that spends a lot of time honing the 3D art. Having limited time for coding, should I learn it for Unity for my small projects, or would it be better to stick to Playmaker? I have basic coding ability, but making anything more complex is difficult. I'd say if you're a 3D modeler, I wouldn't worry too much about learning the coding side. Stick to Playmaker and get ready for the new... the show name was Mythic Quest. Sorry, I don't know if I said that in chat. But get ready for the new visual scripting system that's coming to Unity too. It will, I think, probably end up replacing Playmaker long term, because it's just going to have direct integration, but who knows what will actually happen. But I would say get ready for that, and I wouldn't worry too much about it. Focus on your 3D modeling skills and the art stuff. Don't worry too much about the code. Pick one, and the one that you love the most, and focus on that. What kind of cult would you like to start? I don't know. I'll think about that. Each time you do a Q&A, I've asked you why you slowed down, stopped putting out content for the Games Master. The main reason I've slowed down is just shit got kind of crazy here. Do the next videos for the architecture course, and sorry if you asked this before, I totally missed it. It's probably in chat. The architecture course, the next stuff coming up, well, we have a meetup tomorrow, so we'll talk about it in detail tomorrow. But they got a bunch more lessons coming up really soon. Yeah. So, but the reason I slowed down was mostly just I got a bunch of kids that showed up, so things got a little bit crazy. We started fostering and went from 1 kid to 3, and my amount of time where it's quiet has dropped quite dramatically. So things should be clearing up pretty soon though, and we'll get back to full speed. Anyway. Just want to make sure I got that one. How to access mobile memory using C#. I'm not sure I know what you mean there. If you can clarify that, I might be able to answer. Blank. No. Okay, I recently completed a games development degree. I once explained how the skyboxes in the Source engine worked, and my instructor was confused as to why they didn't just size up the models and place them away in the background. Do you know why Source uses the whole miniature skybox plus render texture? I mean, I think I kind of assumed everybody does the same thing. I don't know why he would think that they would scale up the model and place them in the background. And the problem with that is pretty obvious, that you move, right? And eventually you get there. So I'm not sure why the instructor was confused about it. That's kind of confusing. I'm not sure I understand, or unless he's talking about snapping them around the. Yeah, I don't know. Skyboxes are pretty common. I'm not sure why that would be an issue at all. Any good non-game dev programming jobs that would be a good stepping stone into game dev later? Yeah, tools programming stuff. So either for game development tools, which can be a great stepping stone and a really good way to get in, just building tools for the game team or for the customer service team or any of the other teams in the game industry or the game company, can be a great stepping stone into game development because you've already got the programming skills and you get the domain knowledge, and it makes it easy to jump over to the actual the game stuff. And that's actually how I got into game development. My first game development job was tools programming. So I went from tools programming at Intel for server tools to game tools, and then from there into actual just game code. So it's just a slow transition, step by step. So I would say any of those can be good, but game dev tool jobs can be a great stepping stone. I'm an experienced dev who wants to improve their design and programming skills to new creative heights, but I'm working with a startup company whose main focus is making uninspiring cash grab games. I don't want to leave because I need the money, but I want to grow my artistic game dev skills. Build games on your own. I mean, if you want to keep the money that's going to keep coming in from the cash grab games and keep getting the value out of that, you can still just make games on your own in your spare time. And I would say maybe give that a try and see what that feels like first before you try to jump over to leaving or something else. Like, try just building something where you have full control over it. All right. Unity's engine grows so fast, always adding new features. I can program very well, but I feel like what really grabs people is the art style and aesthetics. But it's overwhelming trying to keep up and learn new skills, such as shader graph or VFX graph or even 3D modeling. Any tips? For that, you need a team. Really, like if you want to do the code and you want to have an amazingly beautiful game, you really need an art team in there, at least one other artist, probably more than one, to be at that kind of bleeding edge. The stuff that you see out there that really gets shown off has teams of people that are working on making it optimized and beautiful. And I would say keeping up and trying to learn all of the stuff is nearly impossible, but learning the stuff as a team with other people is a whole lot more realistic, I guess. I have two projects in mind. Can't choose which one to do. Has it ever happened to you? How do you sort it out? Yeah. I just start them both. So I just start one, work on it for a couple days, start the other one, work on it for a couple days, and then decide which one I actually want to work on. And it depends on what the driving factor is. If it's just which one I think is going to be more fun, then I'll go with that. If there's some other deciding factor, then that may impact it. But usually I try to just go with whichever one I think is going to be the most fun to build and play. All right. Let's see. I've had a long career as an engineering and IT manager and then engineering and software teams. I'm learning game development using Unity as a hobby, but I have in mind to retire from my current profession. What would a company think of a 55-year-old knocking on their doors asking for an entry-level job? I have my first simple game up on the Google Store. To be honest, I don't really know. I mean, personally, it wouldn't matter to me. I don't know if it would to anyone else. Yeah, I think as long as you've got stuff that you've worked on and you've released it, and I can see the stuff and meet the qualifications, and you're going to be interested in working on the project for as long as we want you to work on it, I don't see why it would be an issue. I mean, I could see people. I can imagine it's probably going to be a little bit harder. There's going to be some places where it's going to be an issue, but I don't. I personally, I don't think of it as an issue. I mean, most of the, I just when I see older game developers, I just kind of assume that they're better just because they're older, and it's 100% wrong bias. But it's well, I don't know. Let me know how it goes. I'd be kind of curious to see, what that process is like and how easy it is to get in. I think the fact that you've got a game actually released though is going to help quite a bit, and getting more of them out there and released would help too. Having a portfolio of stuff out there. And that it's not just for you, but for anybody out there that's going out there looking for jobs. Having one thing up on the store is great. Having multiple is even better, but just having something up there that you can highlight is amazing. Yeah, there's a comment in chat about experience isn't an age, it's in sit time, which is completely right. Like, it's very easy to be a programmer with 10 years of, what was it? What was it that Richard said? You can be a programmer with 10 years of experience, or you can be a programmer with the same year of experience 10 times, where you just keep doing the same thing, or you're not really growing and learning new things. So it's very easy to be, an experienced programmer who still doesn't really do much or know much. So you're right about the age not mattering too much. So I always struggle with game design. I find myself getting stuck on the design stage trying to come up with a mechanic and rule set without implementing enough. Then I get frustrated and try to come up with something totally difficult. Any tips on how to avoid this? I feel like it's writer's block for game devs. I struggle with the same thing, which is why I usually just make games that are similar copies of other games when I'm working on them, unless I'm actually working with a team to build like a new unique thing. But when I do that, I have a game designer, so I don't have to come up with the design, because I find that part to be actually a lot more harder than the programming part. So, all right, I'm going to hit the next 4 questions and then bail out, just because I already went over the time that I'm supposed to be at, and I got people coming down my door, or coming to knock it down. Little kids coming to knock it down soon. So I'll hit the next 4, and then we'll come back on and just and just keep going. Do some more questions next time. I'm going to do some more tomorrow after our architecture call Q&A. Kind of unrelated, but I'm trying to do your property drawer tutorial, but it throws null exception errors because I'm basically trying to refer a non-existent float reference as Boolean for using a constant. I don't know how to answer this one without pulling up the code for that, and I don't have it with me right now, but I could probably take a look. Can you send me just send me the problem that you're having in an email with the code that's actually giving the error, and I could probably point you in the right direction. Starting from nothing. How quickly can indie game dev make money? Okay, sorry. Starting from nothing, how quickly can an indie game dev make $3 signs? The answer to that is extremely fast, but probably very, very slow, right? And yes, the architecture Q&A is tomorrow at 11 a.m. PST, not PM. And my email is jason@unity3d.college. It just forwards to my Gmail. So how quickly can you make money? You theoretically, you can make money really fast. Most indie game devs don't make very much money to start, and it takes them a while to get in the flow of it. And I'd say probably more than half of them go under without making a profit at all, is my guess. I totally just guessing again, but I would guess that it's probably around there. So it's not like you're going to just jump in and suddenly make a ton of money. You're going to make a ton of money if you make something that is awesome, something that's special, or unique, right? Like something that people really love and want to get. Otherwise, you're going to make medium money, you're going to make okay money, and then you may end up doing other things to make money too. If you're just starting out in game development, I would say don't start off as a indie developer trying to start your own company and trying to make your own game from scratch. Work with some other people at first if you can. Get some experience seeing how other people build things and learning a little bit from others if you can. And then maybe jump off onto your own once you've seen how games can be successful and what that process looks like before just trying to jump in from nothing and hope to hit it rich one day. Yeah. That's, I guess, my recommendation. Don't just go in expecting you're going to make a ton of money solo and indie. Just make some games first, and then you'll get a better idea of how to do that successfully. Do you think working remotely is good or more problematic? I think working remote is the best way to do it. It's by far normally the least distracting when you don't have a house full of toddlers going crazy and a lockdown. It's the least distracting because you don't have coworkers in there constantly distracting you, pulling you into meetings, talking about other things, and just, I guess, slowing you down. I feel like you can just get a lot more done. So I'd say working remote is great. I highly recommend it for everyone. Is Unreal better to use long term as more AAA studios are using it and the graphics are better? No, I would say it's not. It's better if you want to work on games that studios that or if you want to work on games that are built in Unreal, you should, without a doubt, learn Unreal. Like if the games that you want to work on, like your dream game is an Unreal game or even a C++ engine-based game that's not a Unity game, you should probably go learn Unreal. If you want to work on other games, there are plenty of Unity games too. And the graphics, I wouldn't say are better in Unreal. I think the graphics out the box by default were dramatically better, and now it's relatively caught up. And I don't know of anything that I could do in Unreal that I couldn't do in Unity. There probably is something, but I can't think of anything offhand visually that I can't do in both engines now. That didn't used to be the case. Unreal had a huge advantage on visual quality, and Unity had a huge advantage on deployment platforms. Now I think that they've kind of converged, and they both have great quality, and they both go pretty much everywhere, and they're relatively easy to get into. Now, I'm going to take one extra bonus question. Okay, that's great. If I were to eat myself, would I become twice as big or disappear completely? I guess that'd depend on the code, right? I would probably just get twice as big, though. That's how I would code it, right? Just keep eating and growing. Sounds fun. Anyway, it was an interesting bonus one. Anyway, I wanted to say thanks again for everybody coming out. I know there are a couple more questions, but I got to hop off. I'd love to jump in and answer some more of them later. And if you guys have anything that I didn't get to, feel free to shoot me an email or just jump on to the next call. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share and all that stuff. And thanks again, everybody, for coming out. Had a lot of fun just kind of chatting with you guys and answering questions, and we'll do it again soon.